Thais Gibson is back. She has become one of the leading voices in attachment theory and subconscious healing. You guys might remember her from her last appearance on Velvet's Edge, where we broke down shadow work. I didn't remember, Thais, what we had talked about, and I went back and looked and I thought that was a really good topic. But
Really
we
good one.
talked about how everyone identifying your shadow in relationships is so helpful and that can really change your relationship. So, we're going to do a little more relationship deep dives today. And we're talking about this six stages every relationship moves through, what can make or break them, and how to move through each one with more awareness and love. Hello. I'm so glad to have you back.
Thank you so much for having me. I remember leaving our last conversation just thinking like what a great talk it was and just what a great host you were and what great
Oh,
questions you asked. So I'm
thank
excited
you.
to hang out and join you today.
Well, I just had to start pressing record because we started talking about the topic and I felt like we were doing the podcast. And what I was saying to you was I feel like in the conversations with my friends, we're having all these conversations about relationship, but nobody is really identifying any of these stages. And we're going to get to that in just a second. But instead of identifying that, oh, maybe we're in this stage, people just leave the relationship or think this isn't going to work just to go repeat the pattern in the next one. So I think this is really important to talk about. And it's not something that I've seen widely discussed at all. So maybe let's just start and give the listeners what are the six stages of the
Yeah, so I
relationships?
I love that you said that too because you're exactly right and that's actually why I created this content is
Yeah.
that um people often get stuck in a stage and they don't realize that they just need to learn a couple of different ways of approaching that stage of the relationship in order to make it through to the preceding stages and instead because they feel stuck and go into learned helplessness, they then blame the relationship or
Mm,
themselves and then they're like, okay, this isn't working. And then they leave when a lot of those things are actually very solvable problems. But when people feel stuck, they don't recognize it. So the six stages really boil down into, what stage our relationship is in if we are in one, and how to make sure that if we're feeling stuck, or even if we're not feeling stuck, we just have the rites of passage and the lessons we need to learn to move to the next stage ahead of time, so we can kind of glide through easily. But also, if you're single, exactly like you said, often people will go through the same cycles, keep getting stuck at the exact same stage, and then end relationships feeling like that was such a disappointment or that was
hmm
a heartbreak and even have trepidation going into potential future relationships, thinking, oh my gosh, am I gonna get my heart broken again? I don't wanna go through that again. And oftentimes it's just one or two small lessons that they really need to learn in a certain stage that can make relationships so much more fulfilling and effortless. So to go into it, the six stages, the first stage is the dating stage. And we'll break each of these down in like so much detail, but the intent here is to vet properly. And if you don't do the dating stage properly, you set yourself up for kind of disaster, quite honestly, in the later stages, especially the ones that get trickier. So we'll get into that. But then we have the honeymoon stage, which nobody really
hmm
breaks up in the honeymoon stage. It's the rose-colored glasses. You've
The
got all this
best stage.
attraction. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a great stage. And then everybody's usually really happy in that stage. But then you go into the power struggle stage. And in the power struggle stage specifically, people end up, statistically, it's where most relationships end and people break up. But also in the power struggle stage, what people don't realize is that, yes, there's a crisis of, yes, we've dropped the mask, we're more comfortable. So now we let each other know our real triggers and fears and we're not on our best behavior anymore in the power
Right.
struggle stage.
Right.
And it's elevating conflict. And people think, oh no, there's more conflict. But there's something beautiful about not being on your best behavior, like when you're really letting someone in. And if we do the power struggle stage right, it's actually an invitation to move from more conditionally based love, which is
Mm,
rooted in infatuation and like excitement, which is beautiful, but into really building deeper roots. Like you can almost imagine if we nourish the relationship in the power struggle stage properly and we learn the right lessons that is essentially unlock the future stages, um, then what ends up taking place is we suddenly feel like, oh, this person loves and accepts me as I am without my mask on. And I feel more connected and I feel more supported with this person from this perspective. So then we have the power struggle. And then we move into if we get out of the power struggle in a healthy way, we have what I've now renamed the rhythm stage of relationship. So we find our rhythm with somebody, we're in our flow with one another, and we're in a place where we're going, okay, we actually understand each other's fears and flaws and wounds, and we know how to be mindful of those things. And it's really interesting because, we'll get into a lot of this in much more detail, but you find generally that if you could almost graph conflict,
Mhm.
Conflict's great. It's easy. There's nothing going on in the dating and honeymoon stage, or very minimal. Then the power struggle stage, it really hits this peak pivotal point. But if we make it out of the power struggle stage, the conflict goes way down. And so a lot of people in the power struggle stage will be like, oh my gosh, we have to talk about stuff all the time. It's so tiring. And it's like, well, if you talk about things correctly,
Mhm.
then you won't end up having to continuously talk about them. And so, just as an example, I had two clients back when I was running my practice, and it was a husband and wife, and the wife really wanted her husband to be more present. He was a little bit restless. He was dismissive, avoidant in relationships, so he was a little restless, struggled to be present, and he really wanted her to be more sensitive. She was anxiously attached, but sometimes she was a little bit critical, and he wanted her to be more sensitive to how she was speaking to him and delivering her criticism or feedback. And of course, if you don't work through these things properly, it's always a problem. But if you do the
Right.
power struggle stage correctly, then the wife actually ended up going to her husband saying, "Hey, I really need more presence from you and attunement at times. Can we have these habits? So we have like a 15-minute coffee time in the morning where we sit together. We have half an hour before bed where we really chat with each other, unpack our day. And if we're going on a date or spending time together, just the two of us, phones are away." And because he was willing to do that, he was like, "Okay, I'll work towards that. I'll do that." So then they established that in the relationship. In turn, she was practicing being much more mindful with how she delivered her feedback or shared her needs instead of through criticism. She would say, instead of saying, "Hey, you're not doing enough. I don't, you don't care about me." Instead, she would say, "Hey, I need you to practice being present right now. This is important for
Mhm.
me." And as they mapped that problem out and solved for it, then it got habituated into the relationship. It became their new baseline, their new normal. And that's precisely how you know you're moving out of the power struggle stage and into the rhythm. Because when you're in this position of you've fallen into naturally doing these things now, you naturally are more present. You're naturally more mindful of how you deliver feedback to your spouse or to your partner. Then all of a sudden, you found your footing in the relationship, and there's a
Right.
much deeper connection. And you've really moved the needle from more conditionally based love to more unconditionally based love, because now you're sitting here going, okay, you really understand me. You love me as I am. I've shared my inner
Mhm.
fears and
Mhm.
concerns with you and my needs, and you're meeting them. And so, yes, you'll have to have those conversations in the power struggle stage, but if you do it correctly, it's actually something that deepens the connection in a really powerful way. And that's when you're in that rhythm stage where you get to sort of catch your breath. So we'll go into them in more detail, but then at a
Yeah.
higher level, after that, we have the growth stage that comes next. So we have this rhythm stage, we find our rhythm. Then we go into growth, or what I like to call devotion, where we really
Okay.
devote to the future of the relationship and to future commitments. And then after that growth stage, which we'll get into, we get into the everlasting stage. And the everlasting stage is truly where relationships feel like the honeymoon stage, but this time around, you know each other so much more deeply.
Mhm.
And you fostered such a deeper connection. And at that point, too, I think that people who go through these cycles of always going, dating, honeymoon, power struggle, break up, they think that love should always be infatuation-based love, and they haven't necessarily had a taste or a deep experience of, like, the everlasting stage where love is rooted in deep fulfillment, in deep
Mhm.
knowing, deep understanding of one another, deep protection for your bond because you've built something together that's so meaningful and enriching. And I think that when people I see this so often with, like, people in our programs, they come in, they go, "Yeah, but, like, how do I know my partner won't cheat? Or how do I know my partner won't, be interested in somebody else in 5 years? How can I really know I can connect and commit?" And they get scared of being abandoned or betrayed. But, like, once you get into the everlasting stage of relationship, that doesn't happen. Like, statistically, it's almost a 0% chance once you get to that stage that that really happens, because when people really deeply build something, it's almost like if somebody's gonna build a business and they're gonna put their blood, sweat, and tears into it and care about it and build it, and it's on their terms and what they love, you're not gonna turn around and then sabotage it because
Right.
some other business opportunity comes along that's teeny tiny, right? You're not gonna turn
Right.
around and be like, "Oh, I built a business for 10 years. Let me just turn around and oh, there's a business opportunity over here. Who cares about what I'm building? Let me
Right.
walk
See you
away."
later. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so people get to this point where they've created it, they've done the work, and the problem is that people think, "Oh, no, my partner could be interested in somebody else or leave the
Mhm.
relationship," either when they've been in the power struggle stage their entire marriage, which can happen. People can get stuck in there for decades and they've never made their way out, or when people have never lived beyond the power struggle stage in any relationship And so they think that literally relationships are either infatuation-based love and then power struggle, or, and then they assume, well, then what if my partner just gets infatuated with somebody else? Or what if they change their mind? Or what happens when the infatuation changes into something else? What happens when we get settled in after a decade of being together? And there's this fear around it because there isn't this understanding that, wait, there's nothing to fear. It's actually going to be a
Right.
really beautiful, enriching experience if you do it correctly.
I think what's so tricky about relationship, especially just in the way that our culture models them, is we're fed all of these things. Like even shows, I was watching Love is Blind last night. And I mean, I hate that I get so hooked on shows like that because they're absolutely ridiculous as well. You can't fall in love with someone in a week, but they hook us in. And then I think our brains start to equate the infatuation stage, the idea of this like fairy tale relationship or wedding or marriage or whatever with love. And then we get into an actual relationship, and it's actually so unrealistic to assume that you would just stay there all the time because there's these 6 stages, right? But we don't talk about the 6 stages. We only think about the one. So I think this is really,
Exactly.
really important to talk about because it doesn't necessarily mean you're in a bad relationship if you get into the power struggle stage. But I know I, in the past, would have definitely thought that. You hear like people saying things like relationships are work and they're supposed to be hard. So I think it can go both ways. But like I would either stay in a relationship thinking, well, relationships are supposed to be hard. So I need to like struggle through this. Or it would get hard and you go, well, this isn't the fairy tale I thought it would be. And so are you seeing that a lot where people do not understand that there's all these phases that relationships go through to get to the actual love that we probably all want?
It's like literally why I'm trying to spread the
Yeah.
message to support people, because all the time, like I would say it's one of the biggest things that causes people to, and I love the way that you said that because it's exactly what people are feeling. It's like people think, number one, it's this infatuation based love. It should always be there. And the moment we're not there, oh my gosh, it's a huge problem. And then we kind of compare our expectation or fantasy of how it should be according to a lot of the cultural conditioning we get from shows like that, or even just from like romantic comedies growing up, or
Absolutely.
yeah.
It's
And so we think,
everywhere.
exactly. And so we think, okay, it should be like this. And then when it's not, we get frustrated and even resentful. And then we
Mhm.
justify. That's honestly like when people feel like their needs are unmet and then they justify, and they feel resentful. That's when they justify like acting against the relationship.
Mhm.
And that's when it's like, oh, well, they don't care anyway. So it's fine if I kind of flirt with my coworker. It's fine if but you won't see those behaviors at later stages, like devotion everlasting. You won't really see them because in that space, people are sitting there going, well, I feel really connected. I don't want to threaten my relationship. I want to protect it all the time. And so
Right.
so people for sure get caught there. And then people in the power struggle go, exactly like you said, okay, relationships are just supposed to be hard. And the power struggle will be tricky at times. But for anybody listening, if the relationship feels very, very hard for too long, it's actually a sign that, like, we're not learning exactly quite the lessons we need to progress, because it should be tricky. We'll have these, we have a period of time where we have to hash things out, we have to move through things, and
Mhm.
I think it's important to note that even securely attached people, like every person under the sun goes through the 6 stages, but what you'll see in people with a really healthy modeling for relationships is that they go dating, honeymoon. They set themselves properly up in the dating and honeymoon for the power struggle and move through the rites of passage necessary earlier on. And by the time the power struggle is there, it's like 3 to 6 months of a little more elevated conflict, a little more having to hash out different conversations. But it's not, it's like a sort of small road bump rather than
Right.
a cliff. And and they'll end up being in a position where they move through that, they navigate it, and they keep moving into the preceding
Yeah.
stages quite quickly. And so people often too, to your point, they'll say, I just want to stay in the honeymoon stage forever. And also, we try to hold on to this infatuation based love. It's like we still try to water the plant superficially.
Mhm.
And we're trying to nurture the things that are still at the surface level. Like infatuation is beautiful, and it's not like you're going to lose attraction by the time you get to future stages and suddenly it's just your friend that you love. Not at all. But if we try to root the entire tree in infatuation, the moment like a windstorm comes along, it's just going to rip it out of the ground because the roots aren't deep enough.
Right.
And so it's important to nurture the proceeding stages, to really deepen that connection.
It's so interesting about power struggle because I think so many of us are so conflict averse, right? We just are thinking, ugh, like stay out of it, just stay away from it. The older I've gotten, the more I've understood that two people not having any conflict is not also honest. Because you're just two people, right? Like you and I could sit here all day and talk and talk and talk, but then like if you put us in the same house, we would have different ways we do things. And so you would need to discuss and negotiate and compromise and all the things. And being in a healthy relationship now, I find that those conversations, sometimes, yeah, we can get a little spicy with each other, but ultimately the goal is always to like hear each other, compromise where we can, and work together to get to something that works for both people. And that has changed the way I feel about this like power struggle stage because it just feels honest and it just feels like, hey, we're both communicating about what our needs might be. And then you can move into this deeper love. I've also been in the situations where there's no way to even have healthy conflict or conversation to get to these next stages. Do you see this happening a lot?
100%. So I love the way you shared that because that's exactly how the power struggle should feel in like a healthy relationship is that because really what's happening to your point is in the power struggle, it's a merging of two people's inner worlds.
Yeah.
So we go from, okay, we each have our own conditioning for decades. It's not like, small amounts of conditioning. It's years of conditioning of how we
Right.
expect things to look and what priorities we should have and how our needs are going to be met, how we're going to communicate, how, we're going to validate each other's feelings or not. And it's so funny. It made me laugh when you first said when people don't communicate at all or they say we never have conflict. Truly, because, I worked in private practice and had clients for years and years before getting into our personal development school. And um, when clients would come in on the first day and they would say, "Oh, we don't really ever fight. We're just
Right.
here to work through things. We never really have arguments." That would actually I'd be like, "Oh gosh, these
Red
these ones are gonna be
flag.
even these are gonna be the harder ones." Yeah,
Yeah.
these are gonna be the trickier
Yeah.
ones. I actually had a much easier time helping people navigate who are a little more explosive in their arguments.
Mhm.
Not that I'm saying it's great to be explosive in arguments, but I actually would see more progress faster from people from that perspective than people who had just created this distance by not talking about things. And you can get stuck in this power struggle and there's a bitterness, undertone of bitterness,
Mhm.
undertone of resentment, distance, this feeling of growing apart. And I think it's a very insidious place to be in the power struggle. And what we're really aiming for and truly the rite of passage, and we can go through maybe there's so many rites of passage for each stage, but in the power struggle stage, not to jump ahead, but one of the biggest rites of passage is that you have to learn each other's inner world and
Mhm.
help each other feel seen and accepted in those inner worlds. And to your point, and I love the way you said it, the point of an argument or a disagreement is not to have a winner and a loser or somebody who's right
Right.
and wrong.
Yeah.
That's how we're gonna stay stuck in the power struggle stage
Yes.
forever. But ultimately it's to hear each other. You just said that so eloquently. It's to hear each other. It's to make each other feel seen and then
Mhm.
to find this compromise of like, okay, so you want to spend 4 nights a week together, and I wanna spend 2 nights a week together. Could we land on 3? And being able
Right.
to share and communicate and connect and make these compromises that are healthy, that are not, sacrifices, not one person meeting the other person all the way on their side, but both people truly putting their cards out on the table and saying, "This is truly what I'm feeling. This is truly what I'm needing." And even if we disagree, I'm gonna validate your feelings and your needs and then share mine, and we're gonna have this sense of openness to each other's, and we're gonna have this sense of
Mhm.
like, let's find a middle ground. And when we're able to do that as human beings with one another, that's how we navigate through these hard situations. And of course, this is especially important in romantic relationships. And so, from this perspective, those are two of the rites of passage. It's learning how to do conflict properly,
Mm.
learning to share your feelings and your inner world, learning to communicate your needs. And then another really important rite of passage is learning to be vulnerable. And
Mhm.
I've seen so many people. I'll share a story quickly if it's okay. I
Sure.
had a client years ago and she was lovely. She was like just everything you could put on paper for like the perfect person. She was. She had the perfect job. She had the perfect, setup and home. And she was so well put together. And she was so just, kind and thoughtful and sweet and, had everything together. And I remember when we first started working together, her challenge was she was like, I um, I never really can find a lasting relationship and I wanna have kids and I'm worried that I'm running out of time and I don't know what it is about me, but I just, I keep either choosing the wrong people or I keep
Mm.
getting stuck in this particular dynamic. And when we dug into it very quickly, like in the first couple of sessions of getting to know her, I recognized that she grew up with a father who was a narcissist, and she was terrified of being vulnerable and thought she always had to be perfect.
Mhm.
And so when I asked her about, well, what's happening when, relationships are ending, the common theme was that people would leave her and they would say it in different ways, but they would say, like, I don't feel like I really know who you are. And people would, she had these walls up through trying to be perfect all the time and present this sort of image. And she was so busy trying to keep the relationship in the infatuation-based stages, in that honeymoon stage, that she was always on her best behavior. She would never share her feelings. She would never share her needs. And so people felt like they couldn't connect more deeply. And ultimately, once the infatuation had sort of quelled a little bit in the relationship, because that's normal for every relationship, and they entered into the power struggle stage, there would just be this distance and people would feel like, I don't know what's going on. And when we dug into it, she realized, like, I'm never ever sharing my inner world with people. Like, I'm never sharing what I actually feel or need. And so she ended up having to do that and practice that, and it was hard and scary for her. But ultimately, the next relationship she was in, because she was able to do that, they made it out into the power struggle stage and really had this beautiful connection and kept progressing. So for that, right, you're seeing a dynamic where vulnerability is key, because if we're always pretending or we're always not showing our true selves, there's this inauthenticity, and that also actually inhibits connection.
So how are attachment styles? I know so much of your work is around attachment styles, but how does that play into the stages of relationship that we kind of get stuck in?
Yes. So, the first one is, if you look at the dating stage, so there's sort of rites of passage, or like these lessons in each stage, and you'll see each attachment style approach it differently. So, in the dating stage of relationships, what we'll see as a general rule is that anxiously attached individuals, they undervet in relationships. So, the
Mm,
entire intention of the dating stage is to pick the right partner.
right.
And I often give the analogy that people go into this dating stage and who are anxiously attached, it's almost like, if you can imagine as an analogy, somebody's like, "Oh, I wanna get a new job," and they go and they just apply to the first 20 jobs on Indeed, and one's an engineer, and one's a welder, and one's, a gardener, or, it's like, okay, there's all these jobs, and then you're just gonna throw your feelers out there, find one that you're kind of feeling okay about, and go into it. Well, you just have less of a likelihood of success tracking on that path. Like, if
For
you're just applying,
sure.
you're just gonna have a harder time. And
Yeah.
and so many anxiously attached individuals, they get into dating, and the dating stage should typically last about 0 to 6 months. And in this stage, they get into dating and they go, "Oh, I'm attracted to this person. I like them. There's a spark." And they feel that on date 1 or 2, and then they turn the dating stage into, "Okay, how do I win this person over?"
Mhm.
And there's a really profound self-abandonment in there, and every anxiously attached person I've ever spoken to says things to me like, "Oh, well, I just thought that once they fell in love or once we progressed things, they would change their mind about things like marriage or kids. Or, I just thought that things would get easier once we connected more deeply." And so instead of actually trying to choose with intention, instead of going in prepared, and how we do the dating stage correctly is, we should know our needs, we should know our standards and what we're willing to accept, and we should absolutely know our non-negotiables. And I always tell people, hey, when we're trying to date intentionally, you start your dating experience. You first should be looking in the right places, because it's going to increase your chances of finding what you're looking for. So if you're looking for somebody emotionally available who's working on themselves, you probably want to be going to like personal growth meetups or things in your area, rather than the nightclub, every
Yeah.
every weekend. And not that the nightclub will never have emotionally available people, but you're less likely to find those people in those places, right? Just statistically. And so, you should be looking with intention. And once you find somebody that you're interested in, your first date, yes, should be about just going in and just having an open mind and seeing if there's a spark, seeing if there's chemistry. But after the first date, because you go in equipped to dating, knowing your needs, your non negotiables, your standards, you should be asking one really meaningful question per date. And you should be sharing one meaningful thing about yourself per date and seeing how somebody responds. And this is how we vet. So, for example, if you're somebody who needs consistency, you should be sharing that early on. Consistency is really important to me. And then you can see, hey, this person now knows this about me. Do they try to offer that to me?
Mhm.
Right. So we're seeing how the person shows up based on us sharing our needs early. We're not sitting there telling somebody hello, it's date 2.
Mm.
I now expect you to be consistent and text me every single day. We're not, being really intense about it, but we're just dropping in our needs from time to time, letting somebody know one meaningful thing that we care about, that we value, that we're looking for. And that gives somebody, this roadmap of how to navigate a relationship with us. By the same token, you should be asking something about your non-negotiables. So for example, if I were to, I've been with my husband for 10 years, but if I were ever to be in a dating situation, right, I would, for me, a non-negotiable would be the ability to move through conflict, like to hash
Yeah.
things out in a respectful way, because that's just so life-changing. It's so important to me. And so, I might on date 2 bring up, an hour or so into the date, maybe one of my questions would be, "Hey, how do you tend to navigate conflict? What do you do when you have a hard time with people in your life? Like, how do you approach it?" And just, to ask that, because if somebody says, "Oh, I don't have conflict," or, "Oh, I don't like to talk about things. It's not my way of doing things." I might say, "Oh, and would that be something you're like open to trying to do?" And if they're like, "No," I wouldn't go on another date. I wouldn't be wasting my own time. And so, we have to go in knowing our non-negotiables and being able to ask for those things and get to the bottom of some of those things before we, fall in love with somebody, before,
Yeah.
the connection really blinds us, because this is how we're dating with intention. So anxious
Can I
attachment
say
styles.
something about what you just said, though? You said before we fall in love with someone. I don't know that you can actually fall in love with people truly if you're operating from where you just discussed. Like if you're moving into dating and you're just going, okay, I'm going to just date. And then this is, I mean, not to go back to Love is Blind, but this is what's so fascinating to me about that show. It's like such an interesting case study in people's brains because I'll watch certain parts, like it's always one side of the relationship. So I'm assuming it's like an anxious and avoidant get together. And the anxious person is all in on the relationship. And it's like, but do you even like that person? Do you even align with that person? Like there's all these things missing, but they're so focused on just being in the relationship to get to the goal of marriage that they miss all the things that the person is actually saying about themselves, that doesn't align with them. And they're saying, I love you, I love you, I love you. I'm like, no, you don't. No, you don't. So there's that. But then the other piece is when you gave the example of the job, like throwing all the things up again, like on LinkedIn to get all these different jobs, you're asking someone else to tell you who you are. Like by doing, like applying for a plumber, electrician, like all these things, you're like, well, what do you think I should do? And so it's the not knowing yourself. And this is obviously Spot It, you got it, like from my past experiences. But the not knowing yourself, if you don't know who you are and you're going into dating all these different people, just like whatever, how could you have a real relationship that's going to be able to move through these 6 stages because you don't even know your non-negotiables, your needs, your whatever. You're waiting for someone else to tell you.
I love that. I love how you said you're waiting for people to tell you who you are. I think that's exactly the it encompasses the anxious attachment style in the
Yes.
dating experience. And what I find, and I try to sort of use the terms like infatuation-based love versus deeper love. People can get into like this infatuation-based love, but to your point, I don't think it's like real meaningful love, because
Sure.
you have to fall in love with the person, not the fantasy. And to some degree, if you only know somebody, like I think on Love is Blind, I read somewhere one time that they have like 10 days or
Oh,
something
it's
of
insane. It's actually, it's like, how are we pumping this into our culture? I don't know. And then I'm sitting here as an active participant in the problem because I can't stop watching. So I don't know.
But for sure, there's this part of it where you fall in love with a fantasy, you fill in the
Yeah.
blanks. And, and I think that that can be an exciting and beautiful experience for people. But I will also say, to be perfectly honest, securely attached people don't really do that. They
Right.
they they don't, they're mindful and they're a little slower moving, but I
Hmm.
find that we infatuate or fall into limerence, much more when we have a lot of unhealed parts,
Hmm.
because when we're in a place where we're, so much of this deeply infatuation-based love where people just fall in so quickly is that a lot of it's based on like your childhood. So if you had really deeply
Right.
unmet needs in your childhood, like maybe somebody made you feel really unseen your whole childhood, you didn't feel like your parents were present with you, and then maybe you end up in the Love is Blind pod and somebody makes you feel really seen. They're not physically seeing you, but they see your character and your personality because you're in this environment that's conducive to that. First of all, you don't know if that person's going to be the same way out of that environment when like there's all the distractions of the outer world. But secondly,
Totally.
secondly, there's this point of it where it's like, well, um, you know, that person might make you feel seen, and that's really powerful, and your brain's gonna light up like fireworks if it's been a deeply unmet need your whole life. But love is a lot more than just that.
Mhm.
And one need or a couple needs being really met, well, how does this person navigate conflict? How does this person show up through hard times? What is the character of this person? Do your morals and values? There's just so
Totally.
much.
Yeah.
So yeah, I very much agree with with your point there.
Yeah.
And so you'll see like that's sort of the anxious dynamic. And then dismissive avoidance, they tend to, unless they fall into limerence, which they can, um, but less likely, they tend to move through the dating stage through over vetting. So through flaw finding.
Oh, that's
And they
interesting.
sort of
Okay, yeah.
yeah, so they'll move into it going, "Oh, well, what are all the things that could go wrong? And what are all the
Right.
things that all the reasons it could not work?" And they do this dismissive avoidance flaw find is a strategy to self-soothe.
Mhm.
Because when they feel too vulnerable and too open, their way of self-soothing in relationships is to minimize their attachment needs. So what they do is they go, "Oh, okay, so, I'm not sure, but this I see a red flag." And honestly, a lot of times dismissive avoidance make really small red flags into really big ones.
Mhm.
Like, oh, this person left their space a little bit messy after, I was at their house. Like, oh my gosh, they're never going to be tidy. And I care. And oh my gosh, it's never going to work. And then you're like, wait, do you- could you just talk about it? Could you just address it and
Right.
have a conversation? And they often don't go to have those conversations or work those things out. They just make assumptions, project them into the future, and then pull away accordingly. So you sort of get these polarities in how the attachment styles
Mm.
deal with these stages. And that's why the dating stage generally lasts 0 to 6 months, because people who are more avoidant trend towards the 6-month mark before making a commitment. And people who are more anxious trend towards trying to date it a lot earlier, depending on who their partner is, and commit. And what actually moves you from the dating stage into the honeymoon stage is the rite of passage that unlocks the next stage, is literally making a commitment, having an open conversation, deciding, okay, we're going to focus on each other. It's just going to be us. And when you get into that space of making that commitment or taking the relationship to the next level, that's the honeymoon stage. But if we didn't do it properly, if we,
Mhm.
we picked whatever the job was on Indeed and we didn't like vet and we didn't have the conversations, then when things get a little harder later on in the power struggle, once you leave the honeymoon, that's where, like, conflict gets so much harder to solve for. There could be actual real incompatibilities that you're not willing to bridge the gaps on,
Mhm.
and that's where if we didn't let people know who we were in the dating stage and we didn't ask the right questions, we're gonna find out the hard way in the power struggle stage, and then people are a little bit less forgiving in the power struggle stage. The emotions are higher, they're a little bit more frustrated, and so it tends to be something that if we didn't figure out, for example,
Mhm.
that, we wanna we're not ready to commit for 10 years or have kids for a long time, and the anxious person says, "Okay, well, you're gonna change your mind in 2 years and we fall in love." In the power struggle stage, we get more comfortable, and the anxious then maybe says, "Hey, I don't wanna wait 10 years. Let's, start sooner to commit." Well, that's when the dismissive avoidant might say something like, "We talked about this. Like, why would
Mhm.
you expect me to change?" And then we see these things that are gonna create more ruptures in the relationship in a bigger way.
So the power struggle stage doesn't necessarily have to be terrible. I mean, because to me, it's like it can be workable because if you respect the person, like you said, you value the relationship, you want to meet each other's needs, so you're like, we'll work together. It could be kind of a workable situation. If you did not do your vetting properly, it might feel like the rug being ripped out from under you feeling where you're like, wait, who are you? Wait, you said what? Like that kind of thing, even though maybe they even said it. Did you listen? Did you accept it? Like all of those kind of things.
So this is
Okay.
the stage where there's like the biggest gap in how it's approached. So people
Okay.
who are securely attached and did their vetting, and had the conversations earlier on, and people who know how to fight right and have healthy
Mhm.
conflict, um, what you'll see is that the power struggle stage can be like a 3 to 6 month process. It's like you're
Yeah.
ironing out the merging of your inner worlds, and it can
Yeah.
be difficult, but it's almost bonding. And I'm sure you've had this experience, and for listeners, they hopefully have had this experience too. But, if you're actually in the power struggle stage, you should leave conflict feeling closer, not further apart.
100%. Especially if you can make repair well, like if you're in a couple where you can do that, to me, it's always bonding. It does bring you closer. You understand the other person better. That you feel more understood. Like it can be a good thing.
Absolutely. And so that's like how the power struggle stage should go in a perfect world, is that yes, there's this disagreement or friction, but then you realize, hey, there's distance or there's friction or,
Mhm.
or frustration. let's hash it out. You sit down, you're present with each other. And really, if there's a sort of high level sort of process to move through conflict, it's we both share what we're feeling. We
Mhm.
validate each other's emotions because people think they're arguing about being right and wrong, but they actually just want their emotions seen and heard by the person they love. And so when you're like, okay, I see that this would be hurtful for you. I get that. And this
Yeah.
is hurtful for me too because ABC. And when we hear each other out and validate each other's perspectives and feelings around it, and then we talk about, okay, well, what do you need to feel better? What do we need
Mm.
to come back to center here? And both people share their needs and then try to figure out a strategy to get their needs met, then you'll actually feel like, oh, we had this invisible wall between us or we didn't understand each other. Now we actually see and hear each other around it. We get it. And now we've made a process to get closer based
Mhm.
on what each other needs. So now both people feel loved for who they are, connected to their inner world with the person that they're in the relationship with. And they feel seen and heard and understood. And so we're actually like merging more with this person in a deeper way. And that's how conflict should go in the power struggle stage. And what you should see is generally there's 3 to 6 months of ironing out some of these kinks because it does take time to, like,
Mhm.
actually merge all of your conditioning in your inner world with another person, and once that happens, you should see that that becomes your natural baseline, so your new set point. It's like, "Oh, we just naturally know to do these things for one another because 'cause we've talked
Mhm.
about it enough and we've practiced them, and now they're a new normal in our relationship," and that's actually where we exit the power struggle stage. So that's sort of the secure approach, and that's the healthy approach, and that's when we know we're doing it right. But people on the other side of the continuum or the spectrum here is like, people can be in a marriage and they'll spend their whole marriage in the power struggle stage, live and die there. And this is where you see, people who they're living together, but they sleep in separate rooms, or they're living together, but they're always bitter and resentful. And there's this emotional distance. And, I would make a really strong argument that, if you're staying in a relationship for your whole life, I wouldn't necessarily call that success if you're not happy. Like,
Right.
I think true success of a relationship should be measured by two things. A, the longevity, of course, but B, more importantly, are you fulfilled? Do you feel
Mhm.
connected? Do you feel like there's this love alive in the relationship? Because if you're just staying for comfort and stability and there's this bitterness and resentment, then that's a really painful thing to be spending time living in.
So you said when we exit the power struggle, but I was just thinking it can't just be one time. Like, to me, relationships evolve, and you would hope that you find a partner that you can evolve with, and like life is just going to happen. And so it's like as life happens and ebbs and flows, you might go through some of these stages again, I would assume. Is that right? Or it's like is there just this one time thing where we go through all these stages and then poof, we're in the enlightened place and operate together well? Or is it kind of through the stage or the life of a relationship, you might enter into some of these stages again, but you know how to navigate them better?
So, really good question. Um, I guess there's three things here. So first thing is you want to differentiate between a hard time and a conflict versus being locked in the power struggle stage.
Okay.
So if you did the power struggle stage really well, you mapped out so much of your inner conflict and you know how to have conflict really well to the point where so like obviously I've been in my marriage and with my husband for 10 years and um like if we have a hard thing that's going to come, we've had so many hashing outs of things that I just have full faith and trust that, like, oh, whatever hard thing comes, we'll just figure it
Right.
out. Even if it's really hard, we'll hash it out because I've seen us do that so many times.
Right.
So it doesn't mean that you won't have conflict. It's not like this enlightened place where you never have a hard thing or have a conflict. It's just that there's so much faith. It's almost like once you really learn to ride a bicycle, you're not going to wake up and forget one day. It's
Okay.
like, you might take a harder trail one time, on the bicycle, but you're gonna know how to ride the bicycle, so you'll
Mhm.
still get through it, right? And so we can still have conflict for sure, and challenges, but it won't necessarily relegate us right back into the whole power
Okay.
struggle stage where we're, like, starting fresh. So we will usually really move out of those stages. However, if we go through something difficult enough so there's 2 other things here. If it's difficult enough, then where it actually creates an identity crisis.
Mm.
Identity crises where we lose who we are. All of our needs seem to profoundly change. We don't know how to really process or regulate ourselves at all. We go through something really painful or difficult. Then you're kind of starting fresh because if your needs change so dramatically, everything about you changes so dramatically, then you do kind of have to move back through the power struggle stage again. So, for example, for that one, I remember having a client and this poor individual. they lost both their parents in 1 year.
Mm.
And they had moved out of the power struggle stage by a couple of years in their marriage, but they lost both their parents. They kind of fell into this deep depression. It sort of triggered off this almost like midlife crisis where they were like,
Mhm.
what am I doing with my life? I want to change jobs, and then they sort of got relegated back into the power struggle stage with their partner because their needs changed so profoundly, their
Right.
personality shifted. And so they had to relearn each other through that phase. And that's really what the power struggle stage is actually about. It's about learning each other at a deep way to learn how to navigate things. So you can, in certain conditions, be relegated back and then, yes,
Okay.
have to move through it. But also, we can go back if we don't learn how to navigate the proceeding stages either. So
Mm.
we can still get stuck on later stages. So the rhythm stage, right after the power struggle stage, um, we have to learn to keep the spark alive. That's actually like the rite of passage in that stage. And we can kind of come back and talk about that. But if we don't have good habits or tools for that, then we'll feel this sort of staleness after the power struggle stage. And then people will often go back into trying to fight or pick fights on a regular basis as a means of trying to sort of feel the spark or their connection because they
Feels
didn't
more
figure out the
exciting.
lesson. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that can be something that moves us backwards when we're trying to leave that stage as well. So those are sort of the three frames that it fits into, if that makes sense.
That makes total sense. So the rhythm stage, that makes sense to me too, that people often might leave during that stage because you just get stagnant. And I know that I've learned this in my journey, and I think you've talked about this too, but if you've grown up in a house that's chaotic or whatever, normal, normalcy and security and all of those things can feel boring almost. And so maybe if you're a person that identifies with those stories, getting to the rhythm stage could feel kind of like bland.
That's exactly, you just nailed it. So truly, and that's usually who actually gets stuck there the most is people who grew up in chaos because their nervous system is like
Yeah.
familiar with chaos. It's your comfort zone. And so you're like, wait, where's the chaos? And
Mhm.
then we sort of feel this restlessness in that stage. And so what the goal is of that stage, because you'll see people sort of settle in differently. So you'll see, for
Mhm.
example, like dismissive avoidants love the rhythm stage. They love the comfort and stability because they're comfort and stability seekers. Anxious attachment styles usually feel the security of the commitment and the certainty. So even they tend to navigate it quite well. It's usually more than anybody or fearful avoidance. Anxious can struggle a little bit, but fearful avoidant attachment styles who they're like, wait, where's the roller coaster? Where are the ups and
Yeah.
downs? I'm not used to this. And so it breeds two important questions. One being, um, well, what in you needs healing to
Mm.
be comfortable in comfort and safe in safety rather than feeling so restless and almost untrusting of comfort and safety. And a lot of times that's actually a call for nervous system regulation work and somatic processing and getting your body comfortable to feel safe. Because what's actually sponsoring it at the root for people who might be anxious, but more likely fearful avoided, um, is if they are uncomfortable in comfort, it's that they're like, "No, no, no, I need to be on high alert because I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop."
Right.
And so there's this, like, deep core wound of I am unsafe, and I can't trust, whether it's the person or even just the world, the future, right? And so actually rewiring those core wounds is such a profound part of healing. And then in turn, your nervous system and then practicing nervous system regulation at the same time helps you feel safe in your body, feel connected, get comfortable in that space, but also you don't have these subconsciously stored beliefs that are driving this idea of like,
Mm.
wait, but I can't trust. What if I do, settle in here and then something bad happens, so being able to come out of being on high alert. So there's very much an individual lesson in each of these stages. There's actually an individual healing lesson for people who find themselves stuck there as well.
Doesn't it
And we
always
could go
go
on
back to
about
that though?
yeah,
That is
exactly.
life, I feel.
100%. And then the secondary part of it in the relationship is that we don't just do the individual healing, but also in the relationship, you have to find, often the people who also are restless, they still have a need for novelty. They still have a need for passion, for a spark, for chemistry. And those are not unhealthy needs. But if we try to get them met by looking outside of the relationship because we feel
Right.
restless, then it became really unhealthy. But if we instead say, okay, well, I'm somebody who likes the spice of life a little bit more. Let me like do fun things with my partner more. Let's try to go to new places. Let's do new things together. Let's take on new hobbies. Let's figure out what helps us feel really connected and excited in the relationship. Let's have a weekly date night no matter what. Let's do things that keep the romance and the spark alive. And we really feed that into the relationship. Then you're nourishing in that
Mm.
rhythm stage. And then that allows you to feel safe if you've done that inner work, to settle in, that restlessness sort of dissolves. And then by also, caring and nurturing that novelty and the things that drive excitement in the relationship, you also get to really keep that spark. And honestly, it's especially important for fearful avoidance and anxiously attached individuals, but it's important for everybody. If
Mhm.
you're in the rhythm stage, it's still important to have things that are rituals for connection, rituals where you're feeding. We have 4 pillars in connection. We have an intellectual pillar of connection, which are thoughts, opinions, philosophies, ideas. We have a romantic pillar of connection. We have an emotional pillar, and we have a physical or sexual pillar. And we want to be able to nurture all of those pillars properly. And that's, again, part of the rite of passage in the rhythm stage is like, let's find a rhythm and let's infuse the relationship with habits that are going to keep this
Mm.
connection fed on a regular basis in all the ways that we each need. And in doing that, that then propels people into the next stage, being the devotion stage.
What's devotion?
So devotion is about making those long-term commitments. And if you do the stages right, and I know so many people usually get, and it's totally okay. It's not like you have to do it in a certain way, but so many people usually will get married like in the honeymoon stage.
Right.
Um, and then they'll be, they're married, they're just about 2 years in, and then they enter into the power struggle stage. And the amount of people who have said to me, like, oh my gosh, like after I married my wife, she totally changed. Or, oh my God,
Yeah.
after I married my husband, he turned into a monster. And they think that they like got tricked or something.
Yeah.
And no, it was just that they hadn't seen each other in the power struggle yet. But ideally in a perfect world, right? You have 2 securely attached people. They date for 3 or 4 months. They make a commitment. They're in the honeymoon for another year, year and a half. They move through the power struggle stage in 3 to 6 months. The stability is another 3 months. Another around like 2.5 or 3 years into the relationship. And now they're making a commitment. And this is the devotion stage. And that would be the ideal sort of roadmap, that we don't really make a long-term commitment until we've really navigated all the other stages, because now we're much more likely to have sort of guaranteed that we've truly chosen. If you get married much earlier, it's totally okay. You'll still just navigate the natural life cycle and still move through the stages. But what we'll see in the devotion stage is that because you have these infused habits in your relationship where you feel deeply connected, you're nurturing the relationship in the right way, you're keeping the chemistry and spark alive based on what you need. You know each other's needs. You've learned to navigate the power struggle. You've learned to really share your inner worlds and fuse them together. Well, now in the devotion stage, we deeply know each other. We really love in this space, and there's this mutual devotion. There's this mutual commitment, and this is the place that we want to start planning for the future. How do we want to raise a family? How do we want to, move into the next season or stage of life? What does that look like? And even if you're already married from way earlier, it can be like, well, what do we want next for the next chapter, for the next 5 years, the next 10 years? Maybe we start a business together. Maybe we invest in new hobbies together or a charity, but you actually start devoting to talking about those longer term plans. And something that's so interesting to me is how often people try to sort of jump ahead into the devotion stage in their behaviors when they're not actually in the devotion stage. So
Love
we
is
have people all
blind.
the time. We have people all the time who will be pushing for the devotion stage when they're in the commitments, or when they're in, the power struggle stage. And so they'll be like, okay, let's plan for, let's do this, let's do this. And this is how we'll raise kids. And it doesn't mean that it's negative to talk about those things at all. It just means that when we're in the devotion stage, both parties will really be there. Because
Mm.
sometimes we'll have, especially when you sort of rope attachment styles into it, sometimes we'll have somebody a little more anxious with a little more avoidant. And if somebody's a little more anxious, they'll be trying to talk about those things and plan for those things in the power struggle. And sometimes they'll think that because their more avoidant partner isn't in there so excited, talking about it, hashing it out, initiating those plans too, initiating conversations about these things, they'll think, oh, then they may not be devoted to me. They may not care. But actually deep down for a lot of those individuals, what's actually happening is the more avoidant people are just, they're quite acutely aware that they're still a little bit in the power struggle stage. And they actually are trying to more subconsciously, like the way it would come out when I would talk to people about this is more avoidant people would say, I want those things with this person. I think this person is my person. I love them. Um, but I just think there's things to work through first. And it's
Mhm.
almost like they have this awareness that there's still a little bit to map out through the power struggle. And once they find their rhythm, then they catch their breath, and then they're more excited to then be devoted to the future and talk about those things with such an open heart and really map those things out. And so I think sometimes people will take it a little bit to heart, like, wait, you're not in this space yet. But
Sure.
sometimes it's because they're actually both not quite in that space, even though they're moving in that direction really well.
I think that's so interesting about attachment styles because I see it happen all the time, but it's like the anxious person needs the relationship to progress, to feel safe enough to work through all this stuff. The avoidant person feels like, no, we need to work through all this stuff, then progress. And then you see the anxious person's feeling not chosen, the avoidant person's feeling anxious because they're being pressured. Like just all of those dynamics are so fascinating, but I see them happening all the time.
And the way out of it is that anxious people to feel chosen, instead of it being that we're suddenly like truly, anxious people will think that they need to like have the marriage and they had their wedding to
Right.
then feel chosen and safe, and they're kind of pushing for this outcome. But actually, it's just about needs. So once the
Mhm.
anxiously attached individual has the need met for certainty and reassurance enough in the relationship, they feel reassured regularly. They feel like the person's committing, their time to be present with them. So really presence, reassurance, and then certainty. So the certainty that like, hey, we have plans this weekend. Hey, I love you. Hey, I care about you. Even just plans for the 3 months from now that we're making, just it can be these things that are within reason without having to be fully in this sort of devotion stage. Um, if there's certainty about how the person feels, if there's certainty that the person is reassuring them, cares about them, is
Mhm.
investing in the relationship, then they actually don't need the ring on their finger to feel safe in the relationship. They can actually feel safe in the relationship as it stands. And of course, they'll always want that sort of fantasy outcome and then having things, move in that direction. But, um, I find that that's just the way to navigate those things is to move through the stages. And then to have a lot of certainty and reassurance within there. And that will often then cause the anxious person to settle in a little bit more, feel more safe, feel more connected, and in turn, take the pressure off a little bit. And the moment the
Mhm.
pressure's off, you'll usually see the more avoidant leaning person step into the relationship with the person and be more present rather than dragging their feet as a response to pressure, which is the trigger, rather than the person and wanting to
Yeah.
be with the person that's the trigger. And so as soon as you have that set up, the momentum builds in a much better way.
Right. And it's just, yeah, that whole piece is so fascinating to me just to watch it happen because, again, I think that's a societal thing that we have attached. Okay, if we get married, then I'll feel like this. Or like, like you think if you get to this commitment stage, it's going to soothe all of the feelings you have. But we never actually talk about the way to actually soothe them. We're just talking about these programmed things of like the fairy tale again. And I think people get into relationships, start going through these actual stages and think, wait, I'm doing this wrong, or this isn't the right relationship, just like we were talking about at the beginning of this podcast.
And you'll never be able to fix an internal problem with an external thing.
Yeah.
And so we think, "Oh, yeah, I'll feel settled once the day after the wedding." But
Hmm.
then the problem just changes forms. Well, how do I know they wanna stay married to me? How do I know that they won't find somebody outside of the marriage? How do I know? So those programs will still stay there, and really the solution is to learn to meet each other's needs really well and navigate the power struggle stage and also to rewire the wounds that you have. So the fear of abandonment can be rewired. The fear of being trapped, if you're more avoidant, can be rewired. Like, and that's why addressing the subconscious mind and really getting into the neuroplasticity aspect of it and being able to rewire those triggers also speeds up our ability to navigate the stages so much more effectively.
Did we miss one? Is there one more at the
The
end
last
of
stage, yeah.
what's the
So
last stage?
the last stage is the everlasting stage. So this is a
Okay.
stage that's honestly like the honeymoon stage, but you know each other. It's not
Yeah, it's
it's
the
not
real
y
version.
you really know each other. Yeah, you live through things at that point, and this is a stage where people are statistically highly, highly likely, almost net zero, likely to break up. Because there's and people are at the stage are acting out on their commitments. So the commitment stage is the commitment devotion part is all about like us diving in there and devoting to the relationship and really, which is stage 5, really planning and talking about it and seeing what we want to do. And then the everlasting stage is we're now doing, we're now in it, we're now enacting these things. They're taking shape in our lives. Um, and that's the place from which people are like, well, we know how to navigate conflict. If hard things come our way, we know how to address them. There's a sense of certainty, there's a sense of fulfillment because your needs are deeply met. Like to actually make it to that stage, your needs have to be really, really met. And that's when I think of that idea of a business. Like if you build a business and you love it and you built it for a decade, you're not going to be like, oh, a business opportunity over here. Let me leave this one behind.
Right.
And I think people have this fear that, and the fear is a reflection of them only ever knowing infatuation-based love. So they fear that, okay, my partner's going to infatuate with somebody else one day and leave me. And, when you've built something so much deeper than infatuation, there's no threat to
Can't
like
be
this sort of
replaced.
outside.
Yeah,
Exactly. So there's a sense of safety, there's a sense of really building and creating together and enacting different things. And there's a sense of, how to navigate conflict. And those really are the couples where you'll see them and they are not just together, they're happy together. And I think that
right.
that makes a huge difference.
Again, it's that thing of I think that's the love everyone wants. We just don't necessarily know how to get there or know that there's a road to get there. Like we always just want this instant gratification, right? And I think that goes across the board with everything. But this being an example of another way we do that is that we want to just get to the last stage and we're not talking about all the different steps that we need to take to get there, truly get there.
Exactly. And I think
Yeah,
that short-term gratification leads to short-term it'll give you these sort of superficial things, and short-term gratification, yeah, you're so right. Like our whole culture conditions us, everything conditions us, like movies, television, social media, everything is like conditioning us to look for short-term
yes,
gratification. But whenever we're getting short-term gratification, you get superficial results. And the same thing applies to our relationships. Like if you keep seeking out short-term gratification, you're going to keep having these superficial relationships and infatuation-based connections. And sure, they'll feel fun and they'll feel maybe exciting. You get the little dopamine hit, but you'll quickly fall off the cliff and be like, okay,
hmm,
now the dopamine hit's gone. Now, what's next? And so I think it's so important to your point to sort of share the message of like, if you really look at the 6 stages, if you really look to navigate these things properly, and do a little bit of the work, you're gonna get results way beyond, this sort of initial dopamine hit or excitement. You're gonna actually feel this really, really deep connection, but of course, it will require a little bit of that work, that vulnerability, learning to navigate conflict, but that will benefit you in so many ways across all areas of life, like to know how to communicate properly, to know how to be more
absolutely.
vulnerable. It will really spill into everything.
I feel like I was thinking short-term gratification probably equals a lot of short-term relationships, like
Yes,
just in general. And the price of
exactly.
admission is these steps. So it's like if you want the real thing, you got to go through the steps. Like it just makes sense to me. I know that the personal development school is now going to be offering a program around these 6 stages. Can you talk to the listeners a little bit about what that program will look like?
Yes, for sure. Thank you. So, basically, we have a whole program so people can come in, they can take an assessment, even whether they're single or in a relationship. If you're single, you'll see what stage you always get stuck at and what that
Okay.
basically says about you and your patterns and your themes. So people will really be able to dig in there and be like, oh, okay, I get stuck at this stage because I haven't learned these rites of passage yet. I haven't learned these lessons yet about maybe how to be vulnerable or how to date properly or how to keep the spark alive. So you'll get that report. And then on the flip side, if you're in a relationship and you're just feeling kind of stuck or like things are on the rocks or you're not sure what to do next, you'll get really clear about where you currently are in a relationship and then what you need to be able to move through it. And then from there, we take you through a whole program to define your stage, learn about all of the stages. And it takes you through exactly the inner healing you need to do, whether it's rewiring your triggers or learning your needs or learning to regulate your nervous system or learning boundaries. Like we have a program that will help you do the inner work plus the outer relationship work that will then help you to navigate the relationship if you're in one currently, or really set yourself up for success if you're single and hoping to be in a relationship where you thrive later on. So you get sort of the inner work, the outer tools, and it sort of will come together to create this full circle healing and just ability to really navigate things going forward.
Well, I love that you're doing this. I think that it's so important for us to talk about the realities of how to get the relationships we want. And so I just really appreciate this conversation. I'm going to put all of the links to the personal development school, to where you guys can follow Thais, and then also all your books. How many? You have two different books, I think. Is
2 bucks.
yeah,
Yeah.
and it's all about attachment style. So if you guys, she really breaks it down in such a digestible way that is helpful to actually making it tangible. Like you have the tangible tools to make it successful in your life. So you guys will go love those. Go check those out. Again, it will be all be in the description of this podcast. Thais, thank you so much for being here again with us.
Thank you so much for having me. I love chatting with you. I always have the
Me
best
too.
time.
I feel like
So
we could do it
thank
all
you.
day.
Exactly. Thank you so much.
Of course. And thank you guys for listening.